2 of the 31 days of company culture, this insane idea that I came up with in the middle of the night and thought I should just talk to 31 people for 31 days. And one of my favorite people is here today. We've had a few awesome kind of special people in my network I've been able to introduce everyone to in this 31 days. And Dr. Deena Brown is definitely one of them. I think she's been on my podcast a few times. We've spoken on the same stage a few times, and just bumped in. We were just talking. She's been to a few parties of mine a few times. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Let everyone know who you are, what you're known for, what you're working on now. And thanks for being here with me on a Sunday.
Oh, I wouldn't be any other place. And I was probably still in California, I'd probably be kicking it by the pool with you and the family. Hi, I'm Dr. Deena C. Brown. And when we get that question and people ask us, like they say, what do you do often? I get that when I'm out networking. And here's my response to them. And I said, here's what I do. I show up amazing. Awesome. I shift the energy in any room that I walk into. I really focus on being the very best of who I am in order to impact those that I'm charged to lead. And so that's what I do. Now, what people pay me for is another story. And what organizations and even the work that I do now is really help to really embed inclusive cultures and build from an organic and sustainable space relationships. And how do we teach leaders to be better leaders? Because there's good, better, best, and you never stop till your good becomes better and your better becomes best. And I think when we think about our leadership paradigm, that's a tricky area, because in different stages of our life, we have to shift. And that's what my specialty is helping you shift from confusion to clarity, from your comfort zone to confidence, and from chaos to consistency on how do you lead yourself and how you lead others. And that's pretty much in a nutshell. And I tell people the best way to get to know me is to experience me. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation as we get to be able to unpack all those nuances of what does that actually look like. And Chris, I know you got a new book coming out too, and I am prepared in the next month to drop the book I've been working on, it feels like, for my entire lifetime, which is called Confidence. And it's called Confidence, Unmasking the Imposter Within. Because oftentimes we can't show up as our authentic selves, even as leaders, we don't have clarity about who we truly are. And so what are those things, what I call that oxidation of life, that has impacted how we show up as our authentic self? So I am really excited about that too. And this has just been the body of work that has shaped my discussion, my leadership, and even my coaching.
So we wanted to talk today about being people-centric in our cultures. And a lot of what you said, I think, kind of goes to the heart of what we're trying to do. And maybe people can make a mistake to say, well, if I'm people-centric, that means I'm going to give them snacks, or we're going to, have something fun for them, or even that, we say we care. And like that, those things are fine.
Yes.
But that's not what we're talking about here. I mean, you just mentioned just imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. Just for a leader to go back and have that conversation on a consistent basis with people they're trying to elevate, right? That, hey, do you have that imposter syndrome? Do you feel like when you go off and do that project with some other team that you don't have the confidence, or you don't know what you're doing, or you don't know what to say? So, like, how do we really be coaches? How do we really be leaders for them, right? Does that kind of encapsulate a bit, the deeper work that we're trying to do here that you look at?
Yes, but I say that it even goes another level, even beyond that. It goes back to our core. Like when we think about our ID, and what sits in the middle of the word confidence is ID, is our identity. And we have to understand our identity has been shaped by our lived experiences. And even when we use terms like imposter syndrome, and the reason why I started doing deeper research and my research around that body of work, because I'd have CEOs and I'd have CFOs, CEOs, they're like, I have imposter syndrome, but I'm watching them navigate these complex spaces as leaders. And I said, why do you say that? They said, because when I'm in the room, I said, do you feel like you are not enough, or you feel like you don't have the capacity and the capability to lead? They said, no, they do. I said, whoa, that's two totally different things. So you're saying that they think. And I said, well, who is they? And so what we don't realize in that imposter narrative is that they are those lived experiences, because imposter syndrome in my work and my research is a psychic wound. It's a trauma triggered response to something that's happened before. And now when I'm in that space, I'm navigating uncertainty. I don't have clarity. I don't have that playbook of what to do. Now I'm questioning myself. And what's happening is it's rolling back to that earliest experience that I had, whether we were 6, 10, 12, it doesn't matter, but we can't explain it. So what we say is it's imposter syndrome. And we're talking about communities of belonging and fostering culture and the systems, and even in that ID&E work, right, that D&I work. And I kept saying, we need to look at the psychology behind DEI. So is it really the person having this interaction with you because of what's happening externally, or is it part of their internal dialogue happening? And sometimes it's simultaneous. So we have that imposter narrative. We have these these communities where people feel like, I don't feel like I belong, or I can't really work with that person, or that person doesn't really see me. And so the core of it, Chris, is really about people being able to see who you are. But the caveat is, do you even know who you are?
Yeah. And that's so important, because you really touched on, what's this thing that maybe happened to you, or that it was an experience that caused this. But we also have the other experience, which I think Carol Dweck talks about in her book, where you've been told your whole life that you're great, or you were really great at something, right? And then all of a sudden you find yourself in a new environment, a new job. Maybe you're not coming from a place of trauma. You're just coming from a place of like, I've been the big fish in this little pond for so long, and now all of a sudden I'm in the sea, and I feel intimidated, and I feel fearful, and I feel anxious because I don't have that confidence that I had 10 minutes ago, right? Mm-hmm. And to your point, if you don't know who you are and what you bring to the table, you'll get swallowed up in that, right? But
yeah, no, you're 100%. And when Carol Dweck, you talk about that growth mindset, and then even clarifying, and I just want to take a moment and clarifying the concept of trauma, big T and little t. I don't mean like massive things happen to you in your life. You're not getting selected to play handball.
Right.
And you pick on that team. These are those buried subconscious spaces that may exist. I don't know, because again, we all have lived experiences. So also, and now anytime I'm unsure and I don't know, because why? I've always been the person that had to know. That could be traumatic. That if I don't, what happens to me if I didn't have the answers? And we think about our family dynamics, right? And we think about any relationship we might have had with our parents or school or our learning experience, right? If I always had the answer, did I decide to mute myself anytime I felt I didn't have the answer? And so therefore I remained silent and didn't take that risk. So there's so many layers, and I know in this show, but I think that we won't get it all of it. But as a leader, being cognizant that there's more than one story happening is a starting point. Is that knowing that there's a starting point, because there's multiple layers to this, and you don't have to know them all, but you have to be open to listen and ask the right questions.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. What are some of those questions? What are some of the things that maybe we should think about doing?
One of the big questions that I love to ask first starts with myself. So even in that space as a leader, is that I have to ask myself, do I really trust those I'm charged to lead to be able to enter into this conversation? And so the internal question that I have, am I ready and prepared to be open to hear what I need to hear? And if I have a lot going on in my life, then maybe not. I'm going to listen through a different filter. So I have to be cognizant of where I am, of where am I in the dialogue. But now when we shift that to that external space and we're inviting someone in, is starting with them, asking them simply, how do you feel right now? So I always ask first, how do you feel? Seems like a very simple question, but it's very powerful. And I intentionally ask, how do you feel, as opposed to what you are thinking? Because sometimes we have all this other chatter going on and our thoughts are all over the place. But if I'm feeling worried, or I'm feeling nervous, or I'm feeling excited, if I'm feeling all these other things, it could help me level set my follow-up question to that. Because then that one is, why? What has occurred? And just kind of sitting back and letting people begin to tell you the narrative, and being okay when they say, I don't know, I don't have an answer for you, I need to process this a little bit more. Being okay and not trying to push the narrative. So the very thing is asking, how do you feel? And why, or what are the things that make you feel this way? And interesting enough, as a leader, when I've done this, the person I was engaging in this conversation with, they were actually self-solutioning. Because now I'm in their frontal cortex. I took it back from their amygdala and their thoughts and any old experiences, what they thought were going to happen. And if you don't believe me, how many times have you had a complete conversation with someone and they were never there? Well, they're going to say this, and then I'm going to say that, and then they're going to say this, and I'm going to say that. And you went through this whole thing and you are now riled up and the experience never happened yet.
Or sometimes you make it happen, right? The other person wasn't going to fight with you, but you're already riled up and ready for a fight, right?
Yes. And that happens in the workplace as well, is that you'll see someone and they walked right by you and they go, oh, they don't like me. Oh, that leader likes so-and-so, they didn't even speak to me. Did you realize that maybe they were processing that they just had an argument with their child on the way to school? Like they were somewhere completely not there, but we then start making and creating our own narratives. And so that impacts our relationships. And we think about, like you said, the power of company culture, it really starts with your relationship ROI. What investments have you made? What have you stored in that bank, that relationship bank, that will navigate you through instances of uncertainty and when things are challenging, or when you have to make an executive decision? Do they trust you enough because of the relationship that you have? Like that FDIC saying, we will cover you up to a certain amount of dollars in the bank. And I think that we sometimes skip over that, even when we're talking about psychological safety. And we're talking about this, all of it goes together, from psychological safety to those imposter narratives, to those establishing communities of belonging, to cultivating a very strong and positive dynamic, and knowing that we have to add the factor of time into that. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not like Kool-Aid. You add water, you mix it and you drink it. Right. It actually takes time to build.
I love the question and the way you phrased it to sort of start that conversation with people. One of the things that I included in the new version of my book that comes out on Halloween, October 31st, in the States, available everywhere else in the rest of the world, apparently, but us in the States had to wait a little bit. But there's an exercise called bonding that I learned from someone. And it's this exercise of having people, when you start like maybe a big meeting, or it could be once a day, but how are you showing up? Right. And again, it's just like changing the word a little bit. It's not how are you, or like, hey, how's it going? It's how are you showing up? And I find that over time, people get more and more comfortable as you keep asking the question, right? I think being people-centric is not about doing something one time. This is about a continued effort and practice, right? Of being consistently involved and curious about the people that we're leading. And when I did it, man, people was just started, they did not on day one, but somewhere down the line, they started saying things to me like, I just found out my grandmother's in the hospital. I'm really struggling right now. Or we got a new puppy and I didn't sleep all night. I mean, suddenly you were getting this information and you're like, oh, that's why they're a little grumpy. That's why they're a little stressed. That's why it's not me. I didn't do this to them. It's not that they hate their job or that, whatever. It's that there's other things going on here. You start getting the information and they're like, oh, I can help them. I can do something about this. Right. And that, to me, like that's the beginning of really being people-centric. Yeah. But I do want to make sure I acknowledge to everyone, it's exhausting as a leader.
Yeah, it is.
Right?
Exhausting.
Welcome to leadership.
It can be really exhausting, especially if you don't create what I call those guardrails and those boundaries. And the boundaries start with you. The boundaries start with you. And I'll say it again, the boundaries start with you. And when you begin to set those boundaries and create that blueprint, those you're leading will actually follow. They're looking at your lead to that. So when you say, listen, we have this moment, or give me 10. And the best way I could describe it is when I share this story, when my son was, preschool age. And at that time I was in the class, I was a classroom teacher and a school leader. And I was always talking all day long. I'm like, oh my God, you get a toddler in the car, you pick them up from daycare, and they just want to tell you everything underneath the sun. But I knew I didn't have the capacity to be present, and I just needed to level set. So what I started with my son, I would say to him, I say, Xavier, give me 5. When you get in the car, just give me 5 minutes. And then I actually taught him how to tell time that way too, because I actually bought him not the digital watch, from the hands. I taught him, here's what the numbers look like. And when 5 minutes is up, that's where, we can then start having conversation. And so we would get in the car, put him in, and we, get ready to start heading home. And we'd have that 5 minutes. And then after the 5 minutes, how was your day? Then we'd have the conversation. And it was so impactful. The very first time I broke the give me 5 rule. So I picked my son up. I was so excited, had a great day. And I said, he said, Mommy, give me 5. And so we can actually demonstrate and model that, and then create space and grace and capacity for those that we're leading to do the same. And I think that leaders are so busy in a rush. Again, AOP, we have, again, you have a lot of leadership responsibilities that are there. But if you cannot give yourself 5 minutes to level set, to become present, to breathe, to take that quick time out, then what are you really saying? You're not people-centric, because you're not centric about yourself. So you cannot give me that grace for me as well. Can't give me
You just reminded me of another part of this, which is the dynamic of us being on the same page, or sort of a two-way street with our people. And I see so many leaders that they expect people to be at the meeting on time. They expect people to show up and be prepared. They expect all these things. And then they themselves will show up late, not be prepared, right? They will do exactly the things that they want, the opposite of what they expect from their people. And that's a way to really deteriorate the relationship and really ruin trust and ruin that sort of ability for your team to feel like they want to step up and be amazing for you or for the company, right? I mean, how many times has your boss shown up late to a meeting, but if you did that, they would lose their mind.
Yeah, it's
right?
a sign of value. And those are some unspoken things that occur. I call them those little neurotransmissions that actually occur. For instance, if you always cancel a meeting with me, or you're late to a meeting because this meeting ran over, you were speaking to this other person, and you assign additional value to the previous person. So you'll be late to meet with me, or you'll cancel the connection meeting. And I see this when we talk about people-centric, and I'll touch on this too when we talk about what's so important right now in the workplace, especially when we talk about communities of color. We talk about, communities of like women, and we're talking about just the variance, early career. We talk about sponsorship and mentorship, right? And if you have a sponsor who's usually in a senior leadership capacity, and you really want to learn from them, you want to build relationship with them, but they're always canceling the meeting with you to get to know you. Oh, because I've got this stuff going on in the business. This is kind of happening over here. I'm sorry, I could not meet with you. Oh, I had to go back and meet with so-and-so, or I had to go do this. So what that is inadvertently saying is that I've assigned a lesser value to our relationship. Is that their intent? No, but is that the impact? Absolutely. And those are sometimes those subconscious transmissions that occur that leaders don't realize and go, well, I don't understand why so-and-so wouldn't stay late for me, or I don't understand why so-and-so did not stop and drop for me. Well, they have a stored in what you took out of the bank, the relationship bank, is you withdrew a lot of that grace. And it's going to take a while to put it back. And I think that we have to be, again, just kind of aware of that. There's multiple narratives happening simultaneously.
Yeah. And, maybe early when someone first starts a job, everyone's willing to sort of run on empty, without anything in the bank. But over time, you better be putting something in the bank if you want your people to come back, if you want to take a withdrawal later on, right? And
Yes.
have them stay late or have them do something else. And it's tough. I mean, I understand that leaders get, especially those in the middle, right? Feel like they're getting pushed from every side. They're getting squished. The people above them are yelling at them. The people below them are unhappy. I mean, they got a lot to deal with. But you brought up a great point about creating those boundaries, making sure that you are doing those things that are true and are going to set you up for that long-term success. And we used to be really, really sure about our meetings. The company, before I sold it, you had to start on time, and our goal was always to end early, and we would never go over, right? And then be late for the next meeting. I mean, we tried to coach people not to have back-to-back meetings. I mean, that's already setting yourself up for a problem, right? If you don't have a buffer. But and how in the world do you even remember what happened in the meeting and have time to process and to think about what you need to do if you don't put those buffers in there? But that's a whole other structure and issue.
Power of the pause, yes. But Chris, you know what? It's a whole nother, but I think that's a really critical ingredient. We talk about being people-centric, is that depending on your entry point and level in the meeting, the association, the relationship, the fact that some people don't even have time to have bio breaks because they're too concerned. Oh, if I miss the next meeting, then they're going to judge me, or I'm going to, be the person that was late. And so if there's no, breaks in there, or even you feel like you can have that break. So part of it is, did you have the break and you just thought that you couldn't because that's your internal dialogue? Or have your meetings and schedule been set up externally where that you didn't have that buffer? And I think that, again, teaching how to do that is also something. If you're people-centric, do not assume. I learned this back when I was in class. Do not assume people know how to do that. And so it might be the front end as a leader that is simply making the statement. Listen, please make sure. And one of my last roles, I didn't realize that people just scheduled on your calendar. So I never had block work time. And people would make meetings, and I would start early in the morning and go all day, and it would be meeting. And then I'd be up all night trying to get the work done for the day. Until one of my leaders said, "Oh, you got to go block in some think time, some work time." And I was like, oh, like we could do that? Because I kept thinking you got to be available. And so just making those statements, I think, are really easy wins, low hanging fruit. To be focused on people is just kind of realizing that it's the people part of what you talk about being people-centric, realizing we are people. We're people.
Right. And just so sometimes it's a system. So this is why the whole focus of culture is so fascinating to me. Sometimes we just need a system. We need a better process. We need something to guide us to do a better thing. It's not about willpower or trying harder or effort or whatever, right? It is sometimes a small change in just how we do the work suddenly reveals a much better path for us. And we see this in our, you can see this in our personal lives. I mean, I think James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, he talks about, don't set a goal to go running. Take your running shoes, and put them next to your bed. So when you wake up, your running shoes are right there. You put them on, you probably will go running. I mean, that's just a system change. It's not a willpower change. And I think far too often people are asked and feel like they're being asked to just be better, try harder, right? Instead of let's fix the process. Let's make a change here that's going to help you, be easier to do your best work.
And what's the KPI for that? I want to ask people, when you say try harder, what does that look like? Can you give me an example? Because in my mind, and based on what I'm aware of and what I know, I am. So what does harder look like for you? And so having really clear expectations and knowing that, what are the requirements for that? So it's not just the expectations alone, but the requirements that go actually with it. So when you're going to launch some software and things like that, it'll say, here's our objectives, here's what we do. And at the bottom, it says, here's the requirements. In order for this to run at the level of the expectation, these things have to be in place. So have we really done that? as leaders and putting the ambiguous concept of system and processes to those, again, in people language. So people have a really clear roadmap, what to follow, how to navigate that particular space. And the one thing that I wanted to address, and definitely wanted your thoughts on when we talk about culture, I think many get caught up in the climate, and there's a difference between the climate and the culture in an organization. And I was really interested in how do you look at those?
Yeah, often the climate is the symptom, right, of whatever's happening. It's that, I mean, it's a bit like, hey, I'm bleeding. Okay, here's a Band-Aid, but why were you bleeding to begin with, right? Did someone stab you, or do you have I don't know, a disease, or what's happening? So
People say, oh, but they were happy yesterday. We had a birthday party. Well, we just literally realized that our stock prices went up. And so people were excited. They're jumping around and they go, this is our culture. That's not your culture.
Mm-mm.
That's the climate of that experience, and vice versa. And I think that the term is sometimes used interchangeably, and it's not the same thing. And so I always,
yeah. I mean, in any facet of our life, when something's going good, right, and we're winning, everything else falls to the side, right? We forget about all of the other negative stuff. And, if the stock price went up or we landed that big deal, we'll forget for a day or two that we hate our boss, or that Bob next to us hasn't taken a shower in 3 days and we have to sit next to him in a cubicle and you're dying, right? I mean, there's all these things that you just put up with. If you're winning, it's okay. But the moment you're not winning and things aren't going so well, everything becomes more amplified. But to define it, people need to remember that culture is the way in which we get things done.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, imagine you could take any job. In fact, I had this conversation last night with somebody. She's a hairdresser, and she was asking me kind of what I thought culture was. And I'm like, listen, if you stopped working in your salon today and you went and worked at a salon down the street, and I said, how would you expect that to be different? She's like, oh, well, how they do things would be different, how they process that, who gets customers. That's your culture, right? How you get things done. And even though you're doing the same job and almost probably the identical setup and space, but it's different because the people, the boss, the leader have different rules and norms of what's okay and what's not. That's your culture. Then kind of how it makes you feel. Mm-hmm. I think that's still kind of more the climate, to your point. Mm-hmm. Right. But culture kind of can also drive how you feel every day. So that's why it's so important that we get those norms and behaviors and values and those things right. And right is subjective, because that could be right for you as that business owner. This is what I want my people to care about. This is the direction. I think north is this way. I'm going to point us this way. And your people have to decide if they think that that's right and they want to stick around and have a job there, or they want to go somewhere else. But if you're very clear about this is who we are, this is what we do, this is why, and you think it's a good idea, then hopefully you find people that want to, get on that ship and go on a long journey with you.
Yes, that's I love how you laid that out. It was so beautiful. And which brings me to why certain organizations definitely need your book. I need your work now, is that this is how we do things and this is who we are. If that is ambiguous during times of uncertainty, you will have people leaving your organization in droves. And that's the time for you to truly define and hold on to that company culture piece. And I see that so clearly now, where people are saying, do we still stand by this? Are we still advocates for fostering communities of belonging? Are we still interested in doing DEI work? Because, a SCOTUS made a decision doesn't say anything is illegal, just says, it says what it says. I won't go into that at this point, but it's but who are we? Are you shifting, so much that the population that you serve, the people that work for you, with you, and alongside you, don't have clarity around what is our culture. And so then they leave to go to a place, whether the place, that place is horrible, but yet they still know what they're getting. This is I know what to do. So now I can regulate based on that. And I think that that's really the power of really having a strong company culture.
There's some really successful companies with very specific cultures that I would never want to work in. But to your point, I could go in and be successful in that culture because the rules and what they do is so clear, right? About who they are and what they do and how they act and what's expected of you, that you can be successful in that environment. You may not, that's not what I would prefer. It's not what kind of culture I would like, but it's very clear. And that actually would probably be less painful than going to a company where there is no structure, there's no clear, I don't know why we're doing this thing. We sell this thing and I don't know, right? If you want to, however you want to get it done, Chris, go for it. And you're like, okay, so that's sometimes that's fun when you're young and you're starting off and you get a lot of play.
Innovation. I think that's when you can dealing certain things on innovation, but still having like some parameters around that, because then you do that thing because you're thinking, oh, I have creative license, and they come back and say, no, it's trash, it's horrible, and so now you have anxiety. And so now that's where you see more instant imposter. Oh my God, can I do this? I don't think I'm the right person for this. So now we're creating this sense of anxiety an individual because they don't know what to do. And they don't, and even though you gave them quote license to a certain extent, but do they have license to fail? Or is it only creative license to succeed? And I think that when we're talking about like those cultures, is that are we creating spaces? And this is what I tell, not only because I work with my son's football team on mental toughness, agility, and acuity. And I told them, shoulda, woulda, coulda is for innovation only. When you're thinking about that and you're saying that to yourself, is to how should I innovate? How could I innovate? How would I innovate now that I now know this? Because that didn't go as expected. Do we have a company culture where I can do that and I understand that in order to get to that next level of innovation, that there's going to be some challenges along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here with me on a Sunday, helping me on day 22 of the 31 Days of Culture. I'm super excited for your book to come out. Hopefully when you are ready to release it to the world, we can find a way to make sure we amplify that message to everybody. Maybe we'll do another interview or we'll do something, but I'm so glad that you're doing well. I know you, with your move and everything, it sounds like you're happy, but we still miss you out in Southern California. So, but thank you so much for being here, and I'll give you the final word.
Wow. When we think about people-centric, really focus on the people portion of that. But more importantly, start with yourself. You are people too. And you cannot give someone something that you do not have. So until you give yourself grace, until you give yourself the space to truly be human and have a human experience as a leader, it's going to be nearly impossible for you to extend that to those you're charged to lead. So again, it was just such a pleasure and an honor to be able to talk about this, because I do love that concept of the sense of fostering belonging and really having people be seen so that they can be heard, and then they will actually show up consistent for you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your Sunday and a great week. And I hope to see you again soon, my friend.
Thank you. It's been amazing. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.